The next genes that we look at are genes that have to do with energy production. It could be said that the biggest health complaint of people is lack of energy. There's been studies that show that. That's a common issue with my patients. It's probably the most common issue with Lyme patients. I don't have any energy. I have fatigue. So how do we make energy? Well, you make energy through certain pathways in your cells, in your mitochondria of the cells, that produce ATP. So, if you've heard me lecture before, I said you have several life goals that you don't even know about. One of them is to make ATP. That's one of your life goals. ATP is a little chemical compound that gives your cells energy to do different processes, to run different functions, to push metabolic pathways, and to give you energy, to make you feel awake. So ATP is essential. There are genes that help you, that make enzymes that help you absorb nutrients. We talked about those, your FUT2 genes, etc. So we need to look at that first. That's why that's first on the list. Are you getting your nutrients in your body? Let's say we heal our gut. We get rid of all inflammatory products. We're eating a really good diet. We stopped eating junk food. We're off of genetically modified garbage. We get rid of the pesticides and herbicides and stuff in our diet. We're on a low inflammatory diet. We're eating really good food. We're taking really good nutrients. Why am I not healthy? Well, those nutrients circulate through your bloodstream. They have to get inside the cells. How do they get inside the cells? These genes here. So that's what we're looking at. Because if we can't get those nutrients inside the cells and get them to create energy, well, we're still toast. It's not going to work, right? So we make energy through the Krebs cycle, through glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the fatty acid chain, and electron transport chain. That's what these genes are. These are your carnitine genes first. There's a lot of genes in there. Does this person have a lot of defects in those genes? A fair amount. But you'll see people that have chronic Lyme have a whole mess of gene defects in there. They can't even get the nutrients across the cell membrane to get them into the cell. If you can't get the nutrients across the cell membrane to get into the cell, to get into the mitochondria, they're not going to work very well. And here it brings up another point. Some people will say, well, I have Lyme, and it's just disabled me. I've had it for 5 years, can't even function anymore. I'm laying on the couch all the time, I've lost my job. But you're asking me to do a genetic picture that I was perfectly fine 6 years ago, and I had the same genes. Well, I've been doing this long enough that we're going to see certain patterns. With really sick people, you're going to see certain patterns. Matter of fact, we did a Lyme study that if we get through this presentation, it's at the bottom of this presentation, where we had, I can't remember, 100 and some Lyme patients that went through this study, and the familiarity that we had with specific gene defects with those Lyme patients, these were all chronic Lyme patients, was really telling. And I can see a genetic profile, I've done this enough, and look at it and go, wow, this is a cancer patient, or wow, this is a typical Lyme patient. Now, I'm not saying that a particular group of genetic defects is going to lead to Lyme. Lyme is caused by a parasite organism, a pathogen, that you have to be exposed to. However, the difference between Sally, who has debilitated with chronic Lyme for 5 years, and her next door neighbor, who, let's pretend, got the same bite from the exact same tick, the exact same virulence, both people started with the exact same health record up to that point, let's pretend, and the neighbor took 2 weeks of antibiotics and recovered, and Sally's still struggling after 5 years, you really want to look at those two people's genetics. So if they have genetic defects in their mitochondrial pathways that we're going over right here, if they have genetic defects in their gut pathways, if they have genetic defects in in their SOD detoxification pathways and stuff that we'll go over, they're going to have a more difficult time dealing with a pathogen than if somebody did not have those genetic defects. Does that make sense? Question.
If you're having trouble getting your nutrients, could it affect your iron if your iron levels to be pretty low?
So if you're having trouble getting your nutrients, can it affect your iron and your iron levels? You're getting ahead of the game.
I was curious about the genes, what you're saying.
Yes, so there are genes that affect your iron ability to hold iron and holding too much iron and iron oxidation, which is a whole other piece of the puzzle. So one of the statistics with the Lyme patient group was that they have a tendency to iron oxidation. That's down on the list here. But yes, so their iron isn't even working in their body, so they have symptoms of anemia, even having normal iron levels, or even high iron levels. But the iron is oxidized, therefore it can't get into the cells correctly. Still with me? All right. So here's some of these genes in this mitochondrial pathway. This ACAT gene is maybe one of the most important in this pathway. So this person only has a couple defects on there, but a lot of my Lyme patients have defects throughout all those. They can't make ATP very well. And again, I had these genes when I was 6 and I used to play t-ball and do everything and run around everything. Yeah, it's amazing how your body can deal with defects. Now you add an environmental insult on top of that, and it's the straw that broke the camel's back. Does that make sense? Whoa, what happened there? Whoops, hold on. So these are other mitochondrial genes that you need to address when a person has fatigue. And again, if I was dealing with a healthy person, these are your NDUFS genes, other mitochondrial genes. If I was dealing with a healthy person and they are doing a 23andMe profile, and let's say they had a smattering of gene defects throughout this, like this person, right? I would say, do you have fatigue? And if the person goes, I don't have any fatigue. I can get up and go. I wake up at 5:30 in the morning. I'm go, and my wife has to remind me to go to bed at 10:30. Well, then I wouldn't support them. Do you understand? So in my book, there's some genes, regardless of whether you have symptoms, that you should support. And there's some genes that I would only support if the patient had symptoms. So these mitochondrial genes I would only support if a person had symptoms. And understand, I might change that theory down the road, but that's where I'm at right now. The FUT2 genes, I would tell that patient they need to support regardless of whether they have symptoms. Does that make sense? Because you might not have any symptoms of your gut. Remember, the only neurological fibers that you have in your gut are pain fibers for distension. So if you're not getting distension in your gut, you're not going to have symptoms. But you can have all sorts of inflammation. So FUT2 genes I would definitely support. These mitochondrial genes I wouldn't support unless the person had symptoms. But they could be a telltale of why a person has this chronic fatigue.